Hello everybody, this is Sim, and this video is the video summary that I had promised everybody at 2020 Dawn of the New Millennium. It's a summary of the content that I had presented last Saturday, okay? Now, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody who had given us a shout out on your social media at #MaySim. It means a lot to me and my team that you are also helping us to pass this information on. We really truly think that Singapore needs to know this information, okay? And of course, you might have noticed that we gave a one-day offer at the event for people to sign up for a program called Adapt or Die, How to Thrive in Turbulent Times. And a lot of people have already signed up on that day. But we've also had quite a few of you emailing us, contacting us on WhatsApp, asking, okay, what if my friends and family were not present at the event? Is it still possible for them to be there at the one-day event? Now, the answer is going to be yes. Okay, so what's happening here is that we've tabulated the registrations. And right now, for the 15th of February, we can take up to 7 more people. And on the 22nd of February, we can take just a few more people, okay? So if you have friends and family who do want to be part of this event, all you have to do is to send us an email at hello@selfastrology.com so that my team can give you more instructions, okay? It's going to be either 15th or 22nd of February, and our course fee is $794. And as you've noticed, we've given a very massive discount to the participants who had signed up last Saturday, okay? So I'm going to have this offer open until this Thursday, 23rd of January, and I'm going to ask my team to keep this open until midnight, 23:59, okay? So please let my team know. We need to close it on Thursday so that my team can prepare for our participants who are coming in February, okay? Okay, so now that I've finished talking about that, okay, I want to go into what this summary is going to be about. And as I promised, this is going to be the highlights of what I have presented on Saturday. And of course, this is not going to be a 5-hour video, okay? So just so you know, this is not going to include all the slides because this is going to take forever, really, okay? And so I'm going to show the highlights of what we have covered. And some of you may notice that this experience of watching May do this on video might be quite different from watching me on stage, okay? Now, the reason is simple. When I have 5 to 6 hours to slowly explain the concepts, and I also have more time to give examples of how these principles are expected to play out for Singaporeans in 2020, okay? So, so if you have friends and family who are watching this, and they'd like to really get a sense of how these changes are going to affect us, you do want to encourage them to come to our next event when I present this live, okay, so that they can experience this in a completely different way, okay? So now let's get right down to my slides. And I'm going to very quickly introduce myself because many of you who are watching this video may not have seen any of my work before. And so, and I'm going to be presenting some information that could be potentially quite shocking to a lot of people. It might be a little bit hard to accept, especially if it means a very huge disruption and change for yourself. So I'm presenting this so that you know that whether or not this astrologer who is speaking has got credibility and substance behind what I'm saying here astrologically. So my name is Sim. I'm the founder of Astrology Academy. I'm also known as Asia's #1 Western astrologer. And currently, I'm the author of 7 astrology textbooks, and I speak internationally at many astrology events. And of course, I am a professional astrologer. Okay, so I've been featured on several publications, such as the New York Times Style Magazine, iWeekly, Zula.sg, which is a millennial online publication. And even Singapore Polytechnic has done a documentary on me last year. I've also done some programs for private companies such as Facebook, government organizations such as Health Sciences Authority, also with E2I, the Employment Institute. We did like a career profiling program for them. I'm also a graduate of the International Academy of Astrology based in Cleveland in Ohio, USA. I'm also their very first Asian graduate. I am today also their only Asian lecturer. I'm their youngest lecturer as well. So I've practiced astrology for 16 years now. And in this time, I've had more than 2,000 clients that come from more than 26 countries. And my clients include people like regional directors of investment firms, founders of technology front runners, and as well as international speakers and leaders of various industries. In fact, my clientele consists mostly of these people right now as we are trying to apply astrology into a much larger macro kind of scale. Okay, so I also have a school, and my students currently come from 12 countries. Okay, so I presented this bio so that you can be rest assured that everything that I'm saying here absolutely works, and that we have been doing this for a very long time. Okay, so let's go into our content. Okay, and my first section here is about what's happening in the world. Many of you will start to realize that if you walk around in Singapore right now, you'll see that there are some big companies that are closing down. Quite a few retail companies have disappeared now. Forever 21 is gone, Sasa is gone, and in fact, I've just been told by one of my students that the brand Bose, B-O-S-E, the audio speaker system is also closing all its retail stores worldwide. And so people have been asking me, does astrology help to explain what's going on? And my simple answer is yes. Okay, and so before I get back into the astrological points, I want to give you a very quick crash course on what exactly is astrology. Okay, so most people think that astrology is like this picture that I'm showing you on your screen right now. A lot of people think that astrology is like 12 signs, your horoscope. And even now that it's in January 2020, it's quite common to go online and then you see like, oh, you know, click here for your 2020 horoscope. Now, the main thing is this kind of horoscopic stuff is not really astrology. And you really need to know that most of these horoscopes are not really written by fully qualified professionals, okay, just so you know. So then what is real astrology? What you see on the screen here is a top-down view of the solar system. You essentially have the sun and then all the planets go around it. So they move around like you know, like the way we run for like our 2.4 kilometer run, okay? And on top of that, you find that the earth is also turning on its own axis. Now, this is one of the reasons why an astrologer always asks for 3 pieces of information: a birth date, a birth time, and a birth city. And this allows the astrologer to triangulate and to have the exact coordinates for the birth of a person. It can be the birth of a country, or it can be the birth of a company. So all of these are ways in which we can use an astrological chart. So this diagram that you see online on your screen here is the 12 signs. This is what most people are familiar with. And what I'm showing you here is what a real astrologer reads. This is what a birth chart looks like. Okay, and as you can see, this is my birth information. I'm completely transparent. I really don't care who has my birth information, but I just wanted to show you that this is what an astrologer really reads. Now, if you're seeing this for the very first time, it can be a bit overwhelming. There are a lot of symbols and lines and numbers, and every single one of these components means something to a professional astrologer. Now, of course, today's video is not going to be about my chart. And in fact, I'd like to introduce another chart here. And this is the chart of a country. And Singapore's chart is set for 9th of August, 1965, which is the day of our independence. And set at 10 a.m. because this is the time where a proclamation was made on radio to announce to Singaporeans that we are now an independent country. Okay, so those of you who actually remember this, okay, you can actually watch videos of you know, Lee Kuan Yew making this announcement. Okay, and so I promise I'll go a little bit deeper into this. Now, of course, the real crux of why I'm making such a big fuss about 2020 is this thing called the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. And there is a date that I'm very sure everybody will want to write down now, and it's called 22nd of December 2020. And lots of people are kind of asking me, okay, May, what's going to happen on this day? You see, the answer is nothing, and yet everything at the same time. So for those of you who think that you're going to start seeing explosions on the streets on the 22nd of December, I assure you that this is not going to be the case. In fact, most people are going to have this day just sort of pass without them even realizing its actual significance. But in a short while, I'll show you why this day is going to be so important. And all of us who are still going to be alive 20 years, 40 years from now is going to remember this day. Okay, so what does this actually mean? What's this Jupiter-Saturn cycle? So as you can see, this is the solar system. The planets go around it. And what happens is that every 20 years, Jupiter and Saturn will meet in the sky. And when this happens, it always happens at a particular sign. Okay, so I'm showing you this on a timeline, and I'm beginning from as early as 1742. So when Jupiter and Saturn meet in the sky on that year, it is in the sign of Leo. Now, 20 years later, They'll meet again, and this time it's in the sign of Aries. And then 20 years later, it's going to be in Sagittarius. Now, as you notice, everything's in red. The reason is because every time when they meet and there is a sign, the sign is a sign. There's usually an element that is associated with that sign. In Western astrology, there are 4 elements: fire, earth, air, and water. So every time we see in red color, it means it's fire. So in the 1700s, most of the Jupiter-Saturn cycles are in what we call the fire cycle. Now, what happens in 1802, as you can see here, the color is different because this greenish color tells you that the conjunctions are starting to happen in earth. So that happens in 1802. Now, 20 years later, in 1821, it goes back to fire very briefly. And then it goes back to earth. And then you want to watch this, okay? So after 1842, which is a very important year in this presentation, you'll see that after that it's earth, 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 earth. And so what we essentially have here is almost 200 years worth of earth conjunctions. And so if you think about it, right, these are the years in which most of us are familiar with. If you look at the years there, it is when your grandparents existed, it's when your great-grandparents existed, and also your great-great-grandparents. In other words, this is the world that we are familiar with. And what I'm trying to explain here is that all of us who are alive and walking right now are very familiar with this earth world. And I'll explain very shortly what this means. And you see, in 1981, something shifted, and we see the first hint of the air world. And so I'll show you later what this means, but most of you here who remember the 1980s know that the world changed during that time. In a nutshell, it meant that computers and the digital age started to show itself in its very, very early forms in the 1980s. That's when all of us started to have a computer in our home. Okay, so this happened for a bit. And then you'll find that when we hit the year 2000, or what we call the original millennium, it changed back to Earth. So very briefly, it went back to Earth. And in the year 2020, which is what I'm going to focus on this time around, it goes to Aquarius. And so you start to see that the air thing starts to show itself a lot more clearly from 2020 onwards. But what's most important, but you see, the question is, why is Maysim making such a big fuss out of 2020? Because the phenomenon occurs. What happens after 2020? Watch this. It goes to air, and well, it goes from air all the way now. And it will stay in air for the next 200 years. Okay. So as you can see, we are actually on the threshold of the world changing from an Earth era into the air era, okay, which is the reason why I'm making such a huge fuss about this 2020. Okay, so and for many people who want to know what exactly is going to happen right now as we make this transition, I found it to be very useful for us to look back at history, and you'll see that I've sort of drawn a circle there, because then we want to look at what happened the last time that fire became earth. Okay, so now the fire element is associated with specific keywords, and you'll see over here that there is a long list of keywords here that are associated with the fiery energy, everything from grand to pride and honor to the arts, religion, and philosophy. And you'll see that a lot of these words tend to characterize the period that was between the 1600s to about 1800 when this switch to Earth actually happened. So I'm just going to quickly run through and show you some of the images that characterize that period. And as we start looking at these images, I'd like you to consider that these pictures look like a world that doesn't belong to our era. They look like they belong more in a Hollywood movie than in our grandparents' era. And it's not just because it's very long ago, but it describes, you know, people who were very different from the kind of people that we are, right? So as you can see, when there are fights, you know, people used to fight for honor. But you see, for us right now, when our wars occur, we tend to fight for a little bit more than just honor. It tends to be a lot more about money. And they used to have a lot more fights than we have nowadays. And if you think that we have major world wars, think again, right? Most of these other countries were at war constantly during the fire era. Of course, almost every country had royalty in those days, and nobody ever questioned it. The queen shows up, you kowtow. It's as simple as that. And exploration was a major thing. Magellan and Christopher Columbus were also doing a lot of this exploration during that period. It was adventure and discovery to them. Art is for expression. Science is for discovery. So you find that most of these words that I have on the screen here describe the kind of temperament and the beliefs that people had at the time and what was important to them. And so you'll find that this circle that I've got here is essentially what we need to ask is, okay, so the world was like that, and what actually changed during this period that allowed us to sort of transition into the earth world that we know right now. So the entire world's mindset changed to what we recognize today around the time between 1800 to 1842. So you found that people suddenly became workers. Now, it used to be that people were soldiers. You know how they would say, like, how many men have you got? 10,000, 20,000. It used to be that they were describing people equals soldiers. And when this switch occurred, people became workers. And in fact, as we talk about a country's population, we're actually sort of referring to how many people were producing goods and services in that country. So people became workers. And you realize that this happened during the Industrial Revolution, which was, early 1800s when it began. And you find that the world hasn't changed very much since then, even though it's kind of long ago, like almost 200 years ago. And so you see that even today, people are still workers, right? You go and hang out at the CBD and you find that all these people walking by, all workers. All of you are workers. And in 1819, when Sir Stamford Raffles first came to Singapore, you realize that unlike Columbus, he wasn't here for discovery and exploration. They literally were here to look for a port. And the purpose was literally quite monetary in nature. So and you find that that hasn't changed very much still. I mean, most of us are still going overseas to do exploration. We are learning multiple languages, making friends from around the world. And you realize that our exploration is not exactly for discovery and wonder. We are still motivated by money, business opportunities, job opportunities, so on and so forth. Okay. Also, but you found that around the time of the Industrial Revolution, the concept of a constitution, of parliament, of democracy started to rise around the same time. And what it meant was that people like Queen Victoria, who is here in this picture, started to lose their power. So technically she was still queen, but more like, for decoration rather than, for anything that was real. So, and that hasn't changed very much. You see that Prince Harry is in the news right now, and seriously, show of hands, how many people actually care? So no one cares about royalty. That's totally changed. Also, around the time that there was a switch, you find that there were rise of specific countries, mainly because they had money. And also this idea of glamour and fame started to rise together with the rise of Hollywood in the United States. And you see that this period also characterizes certain countries and cities that started to rise during this period. Consider how countries like Singapore, cities like Hong Kong, Tokyo was never very big, in the FIRE era. In fact, they were quite non-existent, really. And of course, they started to rise because of the economic power and the ability to sort of run business, okay? So even countries rose for a monetary reason. Science and technology is still around, in fact, flourished during this period, but mainly for productivity. The idea was to become bigger, better, cheaper, faster, okay? And that hasn't changed very much. Technology is still going fast, going strong, still motivated by bigger, better, faster, and cheaper. The picture that I have here is for medical science, and of course, medical science is also part of technology. And I shared during my event on Saturday that if you think about it, what's the point of medicine is to get us to live longer, and what would be the point of getting us to live longer was so that we could work longer, right? And so again, it is for productivity reasons. Education was for income. Kids didn't used to go to school before the Industrial Revolution, and suddenly, within a short space of time, everybody was like, oh my God, my kids have to go to school. Okay, so they all send them there because you need a job, right? And so things haven't changed very much. We are still obsessed about degrees and getting our kids educated. So that much hasn't changed. We also talked about, at the time, maximizing the earth. Whatever we could pump, we pump. Whatever we could mine, we mined. And that was how it happened in those days. And look, nothing much has changed, right? Some of the mining and petrochemical type industries are still among the strongest industries for many, many countries around the world. So as you can see, I started describing this world that is a lot more familiar to us, and it's the one that we know. And it's been around for about 200 years. But prior to 1842, which is all these fireworks that you see over here, it's almost like there was a line, and we drew that line. And once we crossed that line, the world changed. And so notice how quickly this fire stuff disappeared during the Industrial Revolution. And as we go into the earth world, some of these words that I'm about to show you on the screen is much better characterizes the kind of life that we live nowadays. Now, during the event, I asked my participants to think about how often do you use these words? And I'm going to guarantee that all of us, especially here in Singapore, probably use all of these words in a typical week. Going from Monday to Sunday, I bet you use these words at least once in your languaging every week. And for some of you, you use these words every day. And I want you to consider about how much of your life actually revolves around these earth concepts. Are you ready? Okay, so let's go. All right, so see words like productivity, profit, value, top 10%, investments, retirement, savings. And you want to consider that some of you actually have careers that revolve around these concepts, that entire industries have been built around these things. Look at how we have words like corporate, we have words like efficiency, productivity, credibility. And some of us, really, we've spent just decades in a career that is producing solutions that are for all of these reasons. Like words like ROI is something that we use to describe virtually everything. Okay, so now for those of you who will be joining me on my one-day event in February, I will go a lot deeper into how these concepts and the disappearance of these concepts are going to affect specific careers. Mainly because when we have a smaller group of people, I can get a lot more specific, so that we can start looking at which traits are present in the one-day event, so that I can actually go a little bit deeper into the implications of, let's just say, if corporate disappears from specific careers, or that if ROI disappears from, say, insurance, for example, like what happens to the industry then? That doesn't mean that it disappears completely, but we can actually look at what exactly is going to change about these industries, okay? And so, of course, from 1842 onwards, the world changed forever. We went from a fire world into an earth world. That's exactly what happened. And why is this Maysim making such a big deal about 2020? It's because from 2020 onwards, the world, which is the earth world that we know, will change forever. And so now if you look at the screen, you basically see I've wiped out the rest of the other colors, and you'll see that from 2020 onwards, all that remains on that screen is blue in color, and which means that one of the biggest things that people will find very difficult to deal with from 2020 onwards is letting go of the old earth world that we are all so used to. Yeah, and if you think about it, this is the world that we grew up in. It's the world our parents grew up in, and it's everything that we have been told ever since the day we were born that the world was going to be. And I think a lot of people are going to get a very huge shock from 2020 onwards when they find that things that they've been building up towards for the last few decades might come to nothing. And so, of course, not to scare people, but I would like to show you that change happens in stages, okay? So earlier I talked about how 1981 was our first glimpse of what the new world was going to be like. And sometimes looking at our recent history gives us a good sense of what to expect from 2020 onwards. So in this period, I call it the, oh my God, what's that? And so I'm going to quickly zip through some images, and you want to consider, those of you who were born in the 1980s and before will remember that these things suddenly came up, and it changed the way people live, it changed the way we saw the world. And for most of us, it'd be like, oh my God, like what is that? We've never actually seen an invention like that before. And so, of course, you know, in 1981, this computer showed up. It looks a bit lau gu tong now, right? But that's exactly what everybody had at home. Of course, then we had things like the first mobile phone, the triple W, www was born in 1989. And most of us, we just scrolling Facebook all the time nowadays. And in 1997, the first social media site called 6 Degrees was born. So as you can see from some of these random examples here, is that the digital age started to show its presence from 1981 to 2000. But you'll find that in those days, the concept wasn't really about money. During my event, I showed that the audience, like I asked who remembers MIRC and who remembers ICQ. Or some of you may even recall the file sharing website called Napster. And I asked the audience, did you guys ever remember paying for it? Did ICQ ever send you a PayPal link asking you to pay for its service? And the audience said no. And in fact, between 1981 to 2000, technology existed purely for its pure existence. People were just happy to explore it, to see what was possible, and they had new toys, and they wanted to see how far this could go. A profit making was not in the vernacular at all. And so for most of you who are sort of watching this, this is exactly what I mean by, if you start to wonder to yourself, what does it mean when May says that all this profit and value thing disappears? Well, consider that the world has seen this happen before. We used to have engineers putting things online and not asking you for a cent. So it has actually happened before. And of course, after that, the world went back into Earth between 2000 and 2020, which is the last 2 decades that we have all just gone by. And I called it basically injecting money right back into technology again. So again, it was like we made technology bigger, we made it better, and we started asking, how do I make some money out of that? And so have a look at, of course, during the last 20 years, technology grew even more. But I would like you to consider how in the next few images that I'm showing you, nothing new actually came up. Because in the earlier set of images, that's when technology was really new. And then from this last 20 years, we've never actually seen anything that's really that new. Nobody is surprised anymore. But what was really new and what we didn't see before was that people started to put a PayPal link and they started asking you to pay for the services. And so in 2003, Skype, right? So we've always had like chat online, but we didn't have video chat, and Skype said, let's have video chat. And what we know today as Facebook was started in 2004 by Mark Zuckerberg and his team. 2005, YouTube was begun, and you can see here, this is the very old Laopok YouTube that came up in 2005. 2007, we all recall the introduction of the iPhone took the world by storm, and it gave birth to this thing called an app. And you also realize that the app became like a checkout counter for you to pay $1.99 for this game, or you could pay 60 cents for a cow or something, whatever game you were playing. So it created a gateway for people to make money out of technology. And because technology and money were so interlinked that in 2009, they decided, well, might as well make technology actually money, and Bitcoin was born. And of course, right after that, we've seen a slew of different types of online currencies, too many to name right now. And this basically is a very quick trip down memory lane to have us see how technology has made its way into our lives. And of course, the big million-dollar question is that, okay, so you've been accurate with your assessment so far, and what does this really mean from 2020 onwards? Because then we go right back into blue color, which is air. And so essentially, when we see that, we take all these earth things away, I'm essentially saying that we have learned to make money out of technology, but all of that's going to disappear. Now, I'd like each of you to consider, those of you who have been dealing with technology for a while, how much of it is to deal with productivity? How many of us here are developing apps because you were hoping to make $1.99 from everybody who downloads your app? Or perhaps, you were using it to maybe market some of your products and services. You may not be directly asking your consumers for direct money to be using your technology, but it is mainly used for a commercial reason. Now, I'm gently suggesting that a lot of these are going to disappear. As a very simple experiment, go on YouTube right now and look at some of the highest trending videos, and you realize that they're not actually selling you anything. So in fact, it's one of the greatest mysteries here is like, why are the top YouTube stars making millions and millions of dollars right now, and they actually have nothing to sell you at all? So it's a very good question that people want to start asking from here onwards. So from 2020 onwards, the earth bit disappears forever. And what this means is that what you see on the screen here, all these earth words are going to disappear. And so, as I mentioned, those of you who are joining me on my one-day event, frankly, there are just way too many iterations to sort of talk about how different industries are going to be affected by this. Now, I'm not suggesting that all these industries are going to disappear completely, but rather that it's going to be changed in very significant ways, okay? And so, yeah, all these words are just essentially going to disappear from our lives. Just like these fire words, look at how unfamiliar they are. That's how quickly they disappeared from our lives. Okay, so now in the second portion, in part 2 of my presentation, I talked about an industry outlook. So given the fact that the world was going to change, which industries were going to be affected? And so a long time ago in 1842, some industries disappeared. Now I'm putting this in inverted commas because the industries didn't fully disappear. Let me show you. Now industries that died, okay? So this list over here, everything from art, religion, philosophy, astronomy, so on and so forth, some of these traits have disappeared absolutely completely. For example, does anybody here know a professional philosopher? Or perhaps do you know a professional blacksmith? Right, there's a very, very good chance, or perhaps you might know somebody who professionally deals with gunpowder, right? And you realize that these traits that I have just described or have listed used to be really legitimate careers. I mean, the gunpowder industry was so big that if you recall, Guy Fawkes had to have this big coup that they called the gunpowder plot, right? And there were entire countries that formed this thing called the gunpowder empire. And so you find that there were people just making their living out of gunpowder. Who even does that anymore nowadays, right? And so this is what I mean by the industries that can completely die out. Okay, and I'm making a big fuss out of these guys because I'm suggesting that there are some industries that are really legitimate that we take for granted right now, and that you personally probably know hundreds of people who are in particular industries that could die out just as quickly as the gunpowder empire. And so now some of these traits are still present. Okay, I'd like you to consider that there are still artists among us, and there are still musicians among us. There are also still people serving the royalty. If you go to Europe, there are some countries that still have kings and queens, and obviously there are some people whose jobs are still to serve the queen. But the thing is, I just want you to consider that that's not happening in the kind of numbers that it used to be, and these traits are not exactly enjoying the same kind of respect that they had used to command in the past. There are some traits that have completely changed the way they operate. For example, horses used to be a big thing. I mean, consider in the days before MRT and before you had buses and cars, essentially everybody, and I mean everybody, traveled on horses, which meant that we needed lots and lots of horses. There were entire militaries, and consider that in the fire era, every country had a military and they were always at war. Entire militaries ran on horses, and the fact was, so I mean, I have people now in Singapore asking me, well, I mean, we are in an industry that's so big. I mean, what do you mean that it's going to die? And what would happen to all those assets and stuff? And then my question to you, if you're listening to this, is we used to have all those horses. What happened to all those horses? Because they're not around anymore. So it's like in the past, you would make money out of selling horses to the military, for example. But once they stopped buying, essentially, I don't know what happened to them. And nowadays, are there still people dealing with horses? Yeah, I mean, go to Turf City and you'll see some of those guys, right? But my point is, it's different. Okay, so and people really need to start thinking about how your trade is going to be affected by this change. And so, of course, to make your life easier, I've made a list of trades that is going to disappear, I think, during our time. So in our time, from 1820 onwards, this list that I'm about to show you are industries that rose. Some people have tried to ask me, hey May, could you give me a sneak preview of which trades are going to survive and which ones will not? So there is a little, rule of thumb, I suppose, that if you think about what trade you are in and ask yourself, did your trade exist 200 years ago? And if it did, so for example, if you're a cook, you're safe because then we kind of need to eat. Or if you make clothes, for example, well, that's never going out of style. If you know how to make clothes, everybody's going to need clothes at some point. But there are quite a few trades that never existed before, and you find that your trade may have been born out of systems and processes that came out of the Industrial Revolution. And if this is the case, as the Industrial Revolution falls, you'll find that your trade disappears as well. So these traits that I'm about to show you, I'm expecting them to fall from 2020 onwards. Okay, so if you're ready, here's the list. We begin with mining. So anything to do with mining and petrochemical, fuel is on that list as well. You'll find that a lot of the big companies like Shell and ExxonMobil are starting to shift their attention away from fossil fuels and petrochemical type activities into more clean type industries. And it remains to be seen whether this transition is to be made successfully by these companies. Construction, I'm expecting to be down, and I'll explain it shortly why. Accounting, I'm expecting to be down as well. In fact, words like bookkeeping is already outdated. Nobody keeps books anymore. And frankly, if a lot of activities are happening online, they don't really need an accountant anymore. All you need is to press print, right? And so private degrees are off. Those companies that you see advertising at MRT stations for bachelor's degrees in all sorts of things. Now, here's the really worrying thing. They're offering bachelor's degrees for various trades. And some of you are going to notice when I'm done with this list that most of those bachelor's degrees are for trades that are on this list. And little wonder that a lot of people are doing the degrees right now and graduating and unable to find a job. The auditing and compliance is down. You'll find that the whole idea of auditing and compliance depends on the idea of an industry. And a lot of industries are going to be really hard to audit and to regulate from now on. For example, makeup tutorials on YouTube. Who's regulating that? Who gets to say what's okay or what's not okay for people to post on YouTube anymore? Also, now this one's going to upset a lot of people. Okay, financial planning. And I've written here mass. Okay, so financial planning is always going to be around. I'm not saying that it's going to die out completely, but I'll bet that all of you watching here can easily name at least 30, maybe 40 people in your personal life whom you know to be some kind of insurance agent or financial planner of some sort. The question I want to ask is that, but at some point we needed lots of horses, and as the world changes, do we really need all those thousands and thousands of insurance agents and might I say, just to throw it in as well, property agents? All right, financial planning is going to be gone. Investments are probably going to be gone too, and I'll elaborate on that shortly. The luxury market is going to be affected as well. I'll explain more. Retail, no surprise that everybody already knows retail is like pretty much bye-bye from here on. Worker training assumes that there are workers, and it also assumes that there are companies. Now, if companies and workers sort of disappear from 2020 onwards, all of you who are currently still pursuing things like ECTA training or worker training, you work for like companies that deal with WDA or WSQ kind of training, I'm not sure how long that training is going to go for. Human resources, again, assumes that people have jobs and that there are industries for which there are criteria for hiring specific kind of people. And I suppose if companies start to close down, break down, collapse, we might not need the HR department anymore. And manufacturing, again, that's no surprise. Manufacturing is always going to be around, but I think already for the last decade or so, the focus of manufacturing has already shifted. And I think it's quite safe to say that manufacturing in Singapore is at risk. There are several other countries who do it faster, cheaper, and possibly with better technology. Okay, so for those of you who are going to be at my one-day event, this list is going to be expanded. Okay, so I have way more traits to put on this list. I have very limited space on this PowerPoint slide, and I really only had 5 hours with my audience on Saturday. So there are a lot more traits, and I'm going to go a lot deeper explaining how it's going to affect the people who are present there, which is why I'm limiting my class to 40 people and below, because I want to go deep. I want to go into individuals and see how your traits are going to be affected. Okay, so for those of you who I'm seeing you in February, I promise you I'm going to go a lot deeper than this very limiting list that's on this PowerPoint slide. Okay, and of course what we are looking at is if these traits are going to be on their way down, Then we want to look at what are the keywords for the air era that can give us some good hints as to what kind of traits are going to emerge from 2020 onwards. So what you see on the screen here, this is a list of air words in the astrology vernacular that gives us a good sense. Now, none of these words are going to be of a surprise to you. They've been around in our lives since 1981 till now. And if you're kind of young, you pretty much grew up with all these words, right? So nobody's surprised. Now, what I want you to notice here is not what is there, but what is missing. Notice that the word productivity is gone, value, profit, it's all gone. And I don't think any of us are surprised to see words like online, here and now, instant, connectivity, information. Come on, we talk about this stuff all the time. But what's different here is that we talk about connectivity and profit. We talk about information and efficiency. We talk about what else, like media and ROI. And what I'm essentially saying, guys, is that now we talk about media, but we don't talk about ROI. So you want to think about which traits are going to be affected by all of this, okay? So then if you think about, okay, now what rises at the start of the cycle will fall at the end of that cycle. So some of the, I'm going to show you a series of images that will describe what these changes are going to be. And these are principles that I'm going to need people to sort of apply into their lives and really think about how your traits are going to be affected here. Okay, so like I said, I can bring this a lot deeper when I work with most of you individually in my one-day event. I promise this. Okay, this is a very short video summary. So one of the things that came up during the Industrial Revolution was the need to maximize efficiency and productivity. Images like what I put here is like there's some unnaturalness to it, right? Where we put everything into boxes to try and make it maximize as much product and output as possible. So that's just stopped right now. Okay, and what came up for us, now this image is of no surprise to most of us, but the essential point that came up was that things became automatic and instant. And people are, well, the example I gave during my event was that this is not even about, say, which airline can get me from Singapore to Frankfurt in the shortest time possible or with the cheapest air ticket, because that was what we used to compete on. We're basically saying, well, I'm faster or I'm cheaper or I'm more efficient. But the thing is, like, if I had a client in Frankfurt, guys, I may not even have to fly to Frankfurt. If I needed to talk to him, doesn't matter what time of the day it is, I just have to switch on Zoom. Switch it on and we're basically connected in an instant, right? There is no need for me to fly to Frankfurt at all. So there's something here for everyone to consider, that if your trade is dependent on efficiency, faster, better, cheaper, you might be eliminated by a concept called instant. Okay, so we also talked about maximizing Earth's resources. This part, I think we're all clear that most people are trying to find a good alternative to pumping oil and messing up the world, basically. So I think the only thing that's stopping most of us from switching completely into clean energy is the efficiency of clean energy. And in Singapore's case, I think what is most pertinent is solar energy. And so in this screen, I have some pictures of solar panels. I've actually spoken with some industry professionals, and it seems like we're making good progress on getting solar panels to be a lot more efficient. And frankly, by the time the efficiency is such that we can actually depend on solar energy, it's quite safe to say that the old industries are going to die out completely once and for all. Now, I'd like everyone here to consider that this movement, some people say, well, solar has been developed for like a few decades now. What's to say that it's going to move very quickly? Now, I would like you to consider that the steam engine during the Industrial Revolution was actually invented several decades before the Industrial Revolution really started going like crazy. It was invented, but it wasn't as efficient as they needed it to. It was maybe enough to just sort of move a machine, but it wasn't enough to power an entire factory. And what I'm trying to say is that when that imaginary line is being crossed, technology moves real quick. And so I'm suspecting that after 2020, solar power is going to move real fast. And I'd like people to consider that if your mobile phone and your laptop could operate by solar power, if you could connect to the internet, to data through a satellite connection, and if you were never truly locked or restricted by having to be near a power plug or near a Wi-Fi connection. Now, this could mean that people could move anywhere at all in the world. You could operate from the top of a mountain, you could operate in Antarctica, you could operate in the middle of the ocean if you wanted. And my point being that now one of the reasons why I said construction was going to be in deep shit, sorry for that, but is that I would like you to consider that if, going aside from foreigners, I'm talking to you as a Singaporean, if it didn't mean that you were stuck to a wall plug or a Wi-Fi connection, might it be possible that you might even consider living somewhere in the countryside where you had lots of space, where you are not restricted by a congested city, high cost of living, and having your HDB flat get smaller and smaller and smaller every year? So I'm just saying that perhaps we might be looking at the demise of cities altogether, because now people can just sort of spread themselves out and they don't have to all, you know, cluster in a city. Okay, so we've also seen how during this period that our net worth has been built by working for assets. Like most people have been trying to buy property, build up your investments and so on and so forth. And in fact, this is what we were told, that you work hard and then you just, you know, even your grandmother used to go buy gold bars whenever they have some savings. This was how people, educated or uneducated, used to build their net worth. That's gone now, okay? And what's happening here is that a lot of people are starting to realize that the true net worth is actually attained by what I call doing your thing. And so as in this example, you have YouTube stars that are 5 years old, 8 years old, with no assets whatsoever, no experience, no expertise in anything except a really cute smile and being able to sit at a table, much like what I'm doing right now, looking at a camera and literally opening toys for a living, making millions out of it. So one of the ideas that I had conveyed to my audience on Saturday is that you could actually be worth a lot if you simply just did your thing. And so in astrology, we want to look at how each person has a thing that they can do on a unique basis that people really appreciate you for. And this is beyond just money. It's about something that if you did it, everybody wants a piece, and if somebody else did it, maybe they might not be as popular, right? And so that's one of the great uses of astrology, that we can actually look at each individual and see where your thing is and how you could logically and practically make a career or a business out of it. Okay, so of course, we also talked about this obsession about jobs and promotions and salary. Walk around Singapore at dinner time and all you hear about is people talking about which companies have got a better job, how can you get to the next level. That's gone now. Okay, so you'll find as in the recent years, there have been the rise of the freelancer. And what I pointed out is that nowadays, there is a huge rise of people who are doing Grab driving, for example. Or perhaps if you ordered Food Panda, you may realize that a lot of these freelancers, they're not exactly people who can't find a job. They're not exactly uneducated people. And quite often, they've actually made a pretty good living out of it. And it used to be that people would look at boys like that and go like, yeah, boy, why you have no proper job? But, you know, I'm starting to realize that these guys are actually doing a lot better than the people who have proper job, you know? And so, and it gives rise to some other social implications as well, because then a lot of times we used to depend on things like CPF or worker benefits, health benefits, so on and so forth. And you find that as freelancers start to rise, the requirements in other parts of our lives also have implications, and in doing so, they also have implications for certain other traits which may have been serving some of the old needs. And so things need to change right now. And of course, freelancers are also rising because companies are realizing that they kind of don't really want to hire people on a monthly fixed salary kind of basis. Companies like Google operate almost entirely on contract-based workers. So, and you start to find a lot of new startups are going in that direction as well, which actually, ironically, doesn't mean that people make less. And in fact, the projects are a lot more efficient because now everybody wants to meet their deadlines rather than just sort of stick around on a month-by-month basis, just collecting their salary, okay? So there are way more implications, and especially those of you who are coming for the one-day program, I will talk way more about this, because the way we see it is that everybody is going to be a freelancer from here onwards. And so therefore, we really need to understand what does this mean for you individually and for society as a whole. that we are all going to be freelancers in a very short while. Okay, so and because competition is so rife, you found like the last couple hundred years have been pretty much run by huge organizations. It's the Industrial Revolution saw for the very first time the rise of the MNC. This is how we had like General Electric. We also had people like Rockefeller and his big companies. We saw all these multinational Angmo type companies, and then the Japanese companies, and then the Chinese companies showing up. So most of us have found our stability working for these huge giant companies, and that's gone now. Okay, so one of the analogies that I shared with my audience is about how as we go from earth to air, it's a little bit like an aeroplane lifting off from the ground. And perhaps, you know, this is perhaps a bit of a metaphor, but you want to consider that some companies are so huge, so complex, that putting their operations online is just mind-boggling. Where do you even start? We've got thousands of people across hundreds of countries even. And so now that's very different when you have a two-man company. Putting your operations online is like, can be done in a week. You know what I'm saying? So some companies, too heavy to fly. Okay, and so that's gone now. And you start to see that I'm not lying. Okay, there are big companies. This list over here are mostly retail type companies. You may not recognize all of them because these are household like American brands. But you may recognize brands like Forever 21, Gap. Look at how many stores. So if you notice, this article was published on 8th of Jan 2020, which is just, you know, about a couple of weeks ago. The year has barely begun. This is just the first week of 2020, and look at all these stores that are closing down. And now the article is titled "More than 1,700 stores are closing in 2020," which means these companies have already announced that they are closing their stores. Guys, what this means is that immediately a few thousand people are going to be jobless this year. This is just the first week of January. Okay, so now if this goes on, we might have to get used to opening our newspapers, if we even read newspapers anymore, of announcements on a daily basis of companies that are shutting their doors. And you have to decide right now if May is lying to you or not. Okay, and so as companies start to collapse, the idea of going to a company with a resume and applying for a job that pays you a fixed salary on a monthly basis is going to disappear. And so what happens is that doesn't mean that people operate on their own. In fact, I'm suggesting that there'll be the rise of communities. The metaphor that I'm offering you here is like Avengers. You know, everybody has a superpower, and they all come together and they are sharing their expertise. So people who know accounting, people who know Facebook marketing, people who can design stuff. Now, if you have a team of 7 or 8 people who bring their expertise together, it's not really a company, it's more like a community where it's a bunch of freelancers who work together with each other. And again, this is another one of the huge concepts that I'm going to expand and go deep into detail during my one-day event in February, because people need to realize that in the past we used to work in teams that we didn't get to choose necessarily who we worked with. But as the year changes and the years beyond, you're going to find that everybody gets a choice. Because, you know, then now popularity becomes a little bit more important now, because nobody's ever forced to work with us. And you're going to have to learn to make yourself a lot more attractive so that other superheroes will look at you and say, hey, you're a superhero too, and we want to work with you. Okay, so in future, our survival is going to depend a lot on our personal network, our personal popularity. And for many of you with jobs, you've never actually had to make yourself that popular before. You've never actually had to sort of sell, market yourself, show off your capabilities. And I'd like you to consider that this requires you to learn a lot of new skills, and it becomes a bit useful to use the astrological chart to see what kind of communities that you should be cultivating, because the type of communities we work best with is kind of different for each person, right? I'd like you to consider that. It's one of the things that I will be covering in my one-day event, okay? And so we've had decades of investing in technology, mainly for a profit reason. It's why companies are investing in machines and software and that kind of thing. That's gone now too. And you'll find that most of the successful apps and systems that have come up are mainly technology for community change. I'd like you to consider that's the reason why Alipay, WeChat has been so successful in China. I don't think they were really driven by like trying to make money off people, but rather to change the way China operates. And China is a huge country, and for them to achieve this feat is just mind-boggling for a lot of people. Okay, and in Singapore, possibly the closest that we've come to is maybe GrabPay, and possibly that came up because then they changed the way people book cabs rather than just doing like this on the streets. You find that people are just pressing on their phone. So if we are able to sort of change consumer behavior, you probably have a better chance of dealing with technology, and you realize that it cannot really be motivated by a profit motivation, right? So if that's where you or your company is going for, you might want to reconsider your objectives. Of course, getting a degree, if not die, is something that we've been listening to for decades. That's gone now. Okay, I want to point out that some of you have been investing in like insurance or savings policies because you think your son or your daughter needs to go to university in 20 years time and that you have no money. So the good news is that your son is probably not going to university, because that's like seriously going out of style, just saying. Okay, and the bad news is that if you have no job, there's a good chance that you can't support that policy anyway, right? And of course, the even better news now is that if even if your kid is in primary school right now, there's a good chance that in a few years time they might make a lot more money than you will. So I wouldn't worry too much if I were you. Okay, and so and also in the past, we used to have a lot of these ranking, dividing people. We used to have school streaming where we had EM1, 2, and 3. Okay, I know I'm a bit old-fashioned. But also in a company, you find that people are being ranked and graded, like whether you are grade A, grade B, grade C. You're going to find that disappearing real quick. And the concept of equality among people is going to be really strong, such as male and female, old person, young person, experienced person, inexperienced person. You're going to find that the playing field is going to be a lot more level than we have ever seen in our lifetimes. And so what this means is that it doesn't matter if you're from a rich country or a poor country. I have a feeling the internet doesn't give a damn, right? Everybody is equal. It's down to what can you offer to other people. So this becomes a bit of a root shock for some of you who have spent decades of your life trying to get MBAs, PhDs, or you've gotten some high-ranking director, manager kind of position. You're going to find that when the companies collapse, institutions may be very vastly changed. A 19-year-old may not care whether you have an MBA or not. And in fact, even if you have 2 MBAs, might need a 19-year-old to manage your Instagram account because you kind of don't really know how to use it, right? And so something to really consider. Now I want to show a quick example here of Bobbi Brown Cosmetics, very established makeup artist. She has 236,000 subscribers on YouTube. And it's quite clear that everything is all managed by full professionals. I don't really imagine that Bobbi Brown is that good with uploading videos. But I'd like to show you, just to drive this home, another YouTube account for somebody who looks like she's still a teenager. And her profile picture is not even that professionally taken. It kind of looks like something like this. And she doesn't even have a real name. Look at that. Okay, so this is RCL Beauty 101. Her profile picture is just a bit like a selfie in that sense. She has 14.4 million subscribers. And I'll bet you anything, I don't know her, okay? But I'll bet you she doesn't have half the credentials that Bobbi Brown has. And most definitely not the experience that Bobbi Brown has, because she looks like she wasn't even born when Bobbi Brown was famous, okay? And my point here is that, look, with 14.4 million subscribers, she could launch a toothpick right now and sell it for $1 and she would still outsell Bobbi Brown. And the point that I'm trying to show you here is that the way in which brands are operated is going to be different now. With the online space, it doesn't mean that if you have a big brand that you are necessarily going to survive, okay? And so what we have here is the rise of peer learning, where even if you're 14 years old, there's something to teach. And there are even little kids right now teaching other little kids how to surf, for example. I know of an Australian girl who created her own surfboard, and she's got a series of tutorial videos teaching other children how to surf because she's an expert in surfing. She grew up on the beach, right? And so I like everyone to consider now, before you start panicking and going like, oh my God, we're going to die and all my experience is void. That's not necessarily true. I'd like everyone to understand that there are some skills that are unique to you and you alone. And sometimes the astrological chart can give us very very useful insights on what is it that you are able to offer to other people. And this is one of the things that we really want to look at in my one-day event. It's why I need specific birth charts. And those of you who have signed up, my team will be getting in touch with you really soon, because we're going to need to collect your birth information so that we can have all of these things ready for you when you come in February. Okay. So the rise of peer learning simply means that you have something to teach, something to offer, okay? And so other things like professional packaging, if you're still trying to show off to people with your cars and watches and that kind of stuff, consider that this is what millennial workplaces look like. They show up for work in shorts and t-shirt and they sit on the floor, okay? And so this is what the future of workplaces, if they even exist, is going to look like, right? And so that's going to affect quite a few traits. The Industrial Revolution also saw the rise of material status symbols, this idea of luxury. And this is one of the reasons why the luxury market is one of those on my list of traits that will disappear, because the whole idea is to show off, and that's the truth, with luxury products and expensive holidays, cars, so on and so forth. And I would like everyone to think about a person who got really famous in the last few years. And you may have heard of Marie Kondo, and she's been incredibly popular. And it's not just that, like in Japan, it's really started this movement of what we call minimalism, and it's just clearing out all this crap that's in our life. So essentially, you have a whole wardrobe full of clothes, like clear it until you have just a capsule wardrobe left. And most people are just throwing out what is excess or what is unnecessary, and it comes down to a bit of a utilitarian kind of lifestyle. But I'd like to show you this picture here, and I call this minimalist lifestyles. This is starting to really catch on, and what this means is that while the Industrial Revolution meant that we showed off by showing people how much stuff we have and how high class our stuff is, you'll find that minimalist lifestyles is one of the things that is going to come with the air era. Those of you who are involved in selling stuff, things, high class things, you want to rethink that, right? Because I've got a feeling people are not going to buy this stuff anymore. Okay. So I also covered that how some of us may have trouble adjusting. I honestly think that Singapore is going to struggle a little bit more than most countries, mainly because we built the entire country based on a lot of these earth concepts. Okay. So some of you will resonate with this, some of you are going to get upset with me. But the reality is that the trends are going to bring the downfall of a lot of what I call the Singapore dream, beginning with number one, property. And so it's the Singapore holy grail to own multiple properties, and most of us invest thinking that the foreigners are going to come here forever. Now, I said so earlier that potentially cities are going to fall, because then, you know, if people could operate from anywhere, then perhaps the pool of a congested, expensive, and a very tight kind of city is not going to be as popular as it used to be. So I wouldn't be so sure that, because on top of that, foreigners kind of don't really have to come here to work for us, right? And so when it's online, we could technically work for anybody in the world. We could work for an Ethiopian person, could work for us and not have to come here at all. So you don't want to assume that they will keep coming. Okay, most of us, quite a lot of us, have invested in offices, retail spaces, and I think with retail, you're quite clear now. Walk into a shopping mall and you'll find it's like a ghost town. People are not renting shops anymore, and those of you who have invested in shops really need to rethink this. I think you might need to think about what are the uses you could use your space for, because retail ain't going to cut it anymore. Now, offices. This assumes those of you, especially those who've invested in grade A offices in the high class CBD, you're assuming that the MNCs are going to show up. You're assuming that there are these big companies going to show up, but guess what? They're not, because they're not going to exist anymore. And even if they do, see this picture over here, anybody here who has ever been to one of those co-working spaces anytime recently will see that this image that I've put here is a very common one. You've got just random people sitting there with the headphones and a laptop and a coffee. And you know what? That's all you need for a company nowadays. That and you don't want to assume that when you see a geeky person sitting there, looks nerdy, but I'll bet with you, sometimes they make millions. Possibly a lot more, because their cost of running a company is so low. And so if offices and shops can be just one table, then I'm not sure who's going to be renting your office. Okay, so lots of us got into debt pursuing degrees and then you don't get a job. Okay, so that's happening a lot. So you realize, as I mentioned earlier, that the trend now is that companies are hiring freelancers. And if you're going to be a freelancer, two things are very important: your portfolio. People want to see what you can do, what you can offer, and also your network. And this is one of the reasons why followers on social media is so important nowadays. Also, as I said, if companies start to fall, then you don't look at companies hiring, but you look at which communities are engaging you or even want to be involved with you. So this is something that you really want to think about. Most of us have spent years of our life amassing corporate experience, and you realize that if your jobs disappear and you kind of need to become a freelancer of some sort, you kind of need some fundamental skills. You can be a freelance baker, but that's assuming you can bake. Or you could be a freelance painter or a designer, but that's assuming you have design skills, or that you will be good enough for communities to want to engage you. Okay, so I'd like most of you to consider that if you spend all your life amassing corporate skills, accounting skills, human resource skills, when those things go out of fashion, you're going to need to have some kind of fundamental skill to offer people that's still relevant in the new industry, right? And so again, this is how astrology can help. Okay, we can bring out what your fundamental skills are, what your thing is. Okay, and so most of us have invested not just time, money, but also effort into big brands. This is just makeup brands, but you could apply this to any thing like sound systems, furniture, whatever, right? Just notice how we've been buying big brands for many years now, but it's not the big brands that are going to hold up, because you'll notice also that young people are no longer buying big brands. And what exactly are they buying? Have a look at this, and I don't know if how many people have heard of brands like Blue Tansy or even like Onomi. Don't say you have never seen this. Even I have never seen these brands. Okay, so you'll find that young people are much more interested in this kind of indie brands, and much before you start freaking out if you work for like a big brand. But you also want to consider that if you're going to be a freelancer, it's quite possible for you to maybe own your own brand, right? And so looking at your USP, looking at what is your thing, is what allows you to build a brand that belongs to you and is very distinctive in an online space. Okay. Again, like people have been trying to look cool with all of this stuff, and look at how the biggest earners on online nowadays. It's like, for example, this person that I put on the screen here, PewDiePie. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it right. His video here, I hate Lily's garden and her teeth, gathered 3.2 million views from the 14th of January. Guys, look at the date today, and I presented this on the 18th of January. He gathered 3.2 million views within the same day, guys. Okay, so the truth is, his video, he's not particularly well dressed. He hasn't even bothered to shave. His video is not even, the title of this video is not even grammatically correctly spelled. Okay, so look at that. PewDiePie is worth $30 million. And so you want to think about what impresses the online world nowadays is pretty much different from what used to impress us. So I would rethink that branded car and the branded watch if I were you. So just to drive this home, guys, I've covered a lot, right? And even though as a video summary, but if you look at this picture, it looks like a world that we no longer recognize. And I just want you to imagine that in 1842, that I had gone to them as an astrologer and told them that, hey, you thought that your newborn baby over there is just going to serve a queen, and that's going to be your iron rice bowl. It's like I've just pretty much gone to them and said that now your kid's going to have to go to a school, get a job, maybe buy some insurance. And can you imagine what a shock it would be to these people? And the next picture, this is pretty much your average Singaporean, basically you people. And what I've done with my presentation on Saturday, as well as this video summary that I'm giving you, is essentially me telling you that, well, it's 2020, and we kind of need you to know that the world that you have been depending on, some of the things that we think are going to last forever, that's going to make us successful, might not continue. Okay. And so now the third portion, that's a lot. I'll just take it. Now the third portion of my presentation are centered specifically on Singapore in 2020 and what we can expect. So as I mentioned, this is going to be based on Singapore's birth chart set for 9th of August 1965. Now there's an analogy that I want to explain to everybody. Okay. Now as we go from Earth to air. The concept that I would like to sort of really drum in here is that if you imagine you going on a trip, and all of us have taken a plane before, right? And when the plane is still at the airport, it never really seems like anything is going to happen. You know, people show up, they're just stowing their luggage, checking their WhatsApp. It's like nothing, it's just pretty much life as usual. It's kind of the stuff that we do outside of the plane even. But you realize that it doesn't take very long, and the process of taking off from Earth to air is essentially the plane going on the runway. And even then, it just doesn't really feel like much is going on. And you realize the moment the plane starts to increase its speed and it goes like, and it goes faster and faster until at some point we almost get this violent vibration. And before you know it, just goes, and then it goes. Well, I mean, that got a bit comical there, but the thing is, I'm using this analogy to show you this is exactly what we should be expecting in the year 2020. Okay, so what happens here is that as I'm looking at the transits, okay, and transits are what astrologers use to do predictive work. As I'm looking at the transits, it becomes quite clear to me that right now in January, if those of you watching this video might go like, yeah, I'm not really sure if this chick can be believed. She looks like a credible astrologer, but you know, some of the stuff that she's saying is kind of out there. I'd like you to think that in January right now is when everybody's just still stowing their luggage. You sort of get a sense that, you know, seems like we're going somewhere, and you might feel it in the air right now that when you see companies closing down, like, oh, okay, some changes seem to be happening, but nobody's really thinking that, you know, life is going to change all that much. So this is the reason why you might not be really feeling the change yet, but I'm sort of gently trying to tell Singaporeans that by the time that plane starts moving real quick, you're not going to be able to react on time. And this is one of the reasons why, if you've seen the pictures, that this is one of the reasons why the sign-ups for this transitioning workshop was so strong, for the simple reason that there's no time. And if anybody is going to make that transition, if you are severely in the old world, this transition is going to take you some time. And perhaps conservatively looking at 6 to 7 months to prepare for this is being conservative. Okay, so there are three concerns that I looked at when I explored the transits for Singapore's chart. Now, the first, before I get into that, I will be covering a little bit of astrology here and there, and I kind of don't really want anybody to get upset or like feel like confused or I don't understand this astrology thing. I promise I will do this in English. You are not required to know any astrology at all. Okay, and so in the first of all, Uranus changes houses on Singapore's chart. So what does this mean in English? Because every time Uranus changes houses in Singapore's chart, very unusual things happen. Now, those of you who were present at my talk, I went through a little bit of our recent history to show you how in the past, when Uranus changed house, for example, we saw like unusual spikes in the value of Singapore property. So that was one. I also showed you how in another year when it changed house, we had this insane case of like dengue. We lost 27 lives, 14,000 people got sick, like severely sick. Okay, and also in 2013 and 14, very peaceful, peace-loving, like never protesting Singaporeans within a space of 10 months decided that that protesting was our favorite hobby. Okay, so those of you who were at the event, you will remember me covering all of that. But here on this video, I'm going to skip that all, and I'm going to show you that Uranus changes houses again in 2020, which means that we should be expecting some pretty unusual things to happen in Singapore. And this is also double the usual duration of a Uranus transit. The usual ones that I showed during my presentation on Saturday was 10 months. And this time around, it's going to be 19 months, and it begins from 6th of July onwards. Now, what this means is that if you recall the analogy of the aeroplane that I gave earlier, it simply means that by July, you should really expect the the turbulence to begin by about that time. Okay, and so in this diagram, you'll see that Uranus is transiting the 8th house. Never mind about the astrology, but this duration is going to be 19 months counting from July. And you notice that it's only going to end in February 2022, which means everything that I'm saying here is starting in July. It will last until the end of the year. It will last for the whole of 2021. Okay, so if right now it's January 2020, and if I turn out to be correct in July, none of you who are watching this should expect any of these patterns to end in a short while. Expect that if it does happen from July onwards, brace yourselves, it's going to last for a while, okay? Now, the eighth house in astrology is a concept of what we call joint money. And in a country's chart, we are essentially looking at this very simple concept of what I call everybody's money. So there are a few ways in which this transit can play out in Singapore's chart. I will list all of them that apply to a country's chart. And I'm going to need people watching this to sort of decide for yourself which one makes a little bit more sense, okay? And also it really depends on your life and what you actually deal with. So that as I'm going down this list, some are going to affect you personally a lot more than others. Okay, so here goes. Concept of everybody's money in Singapore. What kind of unusual things might happen? Might happen in number one, the stock market. Number two, banking and loans. Now this affects not just people who work in banks and in the loans industry, but also anybody who owns property. Anyone who has a business and you might have taken out some kind of loan. Those of you who are studying and maybe paying back your education loan. So if you think about it, this is going to affect pretty much like everybody, okay? And things like insurance, the insurance industry, CPF, and last one, taxes. Now, the last one is not a surprise. They already announced last year that we were going to raise the GST, and this is going to kick in from 2021 onwards. So that one is not going to be a surprise. But if you look at the rest of that list, if there are some changes, it might come as a bit of a surprise to some of us. And I'm suggesting that it might not be a pleasant surprise. Okay. So the second concern that I have is that the transits really stack up in 2020. Now, what transits really mean is that when an astrologer looks at what's happening in the sky right now, like it's a right here, right now thing. And if I compare that with Singapore's chart, every transit tells me if something's changing. So in general, when similar transits stack up, you find that things happen big. So one transit by itself doesn't always mean that, you know, like the world burns, okay? But if there are multiple things and it all happens within a short period of time, you'll find that guarantee we expect something to happen. So the reason why I'm so concerned is because in 2020, 5, not 1, not 2, but 5 significant transits, they stack up within a very short period of time. And by very short, I'm talking about less than a year. Okay, so now I'm pretty much going to skip all the astrology that I presented at my event, but I'd like you to pay attention to this particular diagram here, where these pink bars essentially show what's like about to happen for the whole of this 2020. So of course I presented this on the 18th of January, where you can see over here, let me see if my cursor gets on the screen. Yeah, so over here you'll see that there's actually not that much happening. So even as you're watching my video right now, we're still in January before Chinese New Year. So, and basically that's one of the reasons why you may not be feeling that much is really happening in the world or around us right now. But you see that by March, I've written here address injustice. Now I would like each Singaporean here to think about what really happens in Singapore every year, February, March, you draw your own conclusion, that might have, you know, Singaporeans thinking that, you know, you're not too happy about certain things and you might want to sort of address that injustice. By about June, July, I'm expecting a conversation, this forum style back and forth kind of conversation between authority figures and the people on the ground. Perhaps I'm expecting some announcements that are not going to go so well with people. And I like to say that right after my Saturday event, I've actually had quite a few industry leaders who were present in my audience, who have come up to sort of share with me some of the developments that we are expecting to happen in June, July in Singapore, which frankly I did not know before my presentation. And ever since then, I've heard about a few things that has given me some hints about what's going to happen in June and July and which industries is going to affect. So a lot of these, I would like you to know that a lot of these industry leaders are in complete concurrence about some of these announcements that we are expecting in June, July. And right after this forum discussion, you'll find that by July, now if you recall just now, I talked about this Uranus changing houses in the 8th house and the list of things that might happen. Now that's in July when the disruption in 8th house matters shows up. So things like the stock market, insurance, banking loans, CPF, taxes, they all start kicking in by July. Now what I would like, going back to my analogy, is like, can you now see that the aeroplane is going really fast right now? And by July, it starts shaking. Okay, and I have a feeling that a lot of people are not going to like this disruption. And if you're prepared for it, you're going to be okay. And in fact, most of us who are going to be with me on this journey, my intention is to make sure that you are prepared. And so that any kind of loss of livelihood or change in your daily lifestyle, your work life, is going to minimize the kind of disruption that we have for the rest of the year. But I would like to also say that if we are not prepared, this could really be a punch in the face. And so by August, you find that the Mars retrograde transit shows up. And in my event, I said the Mars retrograde is kind of like this. Okay, Mars energy, opposite Mars energy. You're gonna have to draw your own conclusions as to what that means. Okay, and I've interpreted this here as people wanting action and they don't want diplomacy anymore, which means it's not enough to have a nice sounding answer, a diplomatic answer. People don't want a diplomatic answer, they want a straight answer right now. And so I'm expecting that to show up between August and December this year. Okay, and using my plane analogy, that's like serious shaking. Okay, now what's happening here is that this particular transit ends in December, and the specific date that which it ends on is the 21st of December 2020. And you might recall right at the very beginning of my presentation that I said that we are going to remember 22nd of December, first of all, because it's the exact date that this the Jupiter-Saturn cycle officially changes into air. Okay, so that's the first of all. And the second is that I don't think it's a coincidence. Guys, I've done astrology for 16 years. And when dates are like this, it's never a coincidence, never. Okay, and so if this clash or whatever it is that you want to call it, conflict or whatever, if it ends on the 21st of December and the very next day is the 21st and the 22nd is the very next day that this new world begins, that's when I'm pretty much convinced that after the shaking, it's just and this sudden peace. It's like everything just suddenly decides that it's peaceful. And to me, I've not seen this in astrology before. I've not seen massive changes and then this sudden peace, right? And I don't know about you. What I'm describing here can be very scary for a lot of people. If you've been following my logic, and you're gonna have to decide whether or not astrology has enough credibility with you for you to make some plans, some changes. And I've just done this a very long time, and I don't make mistakes, right? And in the weeks leading up to this event, I've been obsessive about checking my calculations, and I'd like to assure you that there is no mistake, right? And even for myself as a business owner, I'm also making my plans with accordance to what I think these changes are going to be. Like all business owners, I have operated my business a specific way, and I've had to look at how this is going to change with the people I work with, the communities I work with, and even working with my fundamental strengths. Okay, so I'm not really kidding, guys. I mean, I'm sharing this with as many Singaporeans as possible because I think this is going to hit us back. Okay, so Singapore has never had a stack up like this in our 55-year history. And I know because I did 55 years worth of calculations just to make sure, okay? And so I like to reiterate that this is happening between March to the 21st of December this year. And this is, again, one of the other reasons why you saw throngs and throngs of people coming to be on my program in February. The main thing is that there's only one reason, and one reason why we run it in February. We want you to be prepared, right? That this thing is happening in Singapore. And most of these people are telling me that, well, even if I'm wrong, which I usually am not, but even if I'm wrong, wouldn't you like to know, right? Just to have yourself prepared and so that you do not panic when things happen, right? I'm a little bit concerned that Singapore is a very small country, and if some of these major events happen, that people might not make very good choices if they are in a state of panic, okay? And so the very last one is that Neptune triggers the unemployment indicator. I just like to quickly show you on the chart that this sixth house is a work house, and the little key looking thing on in that house is a pain indicator. Whenever that gets triggered, essentially we get an unemployment issue. And you'll see here that the date begins from March 2021. Notice it's not 2020, which means this massive unemployment thing may not happen in 2020, but rather next year, March. So that means what we're expecting this year is more like this one, but not necessarily actually losing their jobs. But when it does happen, guys, have a look at the date. Happens from March, and for an entire year, it's just slowly just sliding away. Those of you who know a little bit of astrology might have a look at that bit that I circled. You'll see Neptune there, you'll see Pisces there. These are all what we call melting indicators. Essentially, what I'm expecting is that jobs melt away. So they just fade away like that. It's not going to be like a punchy thing. It's just every day you check your phone and it's like, oh, this company's letting go of people, this company's letting go of people, and that's essentially what I think is going to happen. Okay, and so the last time Uranus triggered this indicator was April 08 to 09. So those of us who are old enough to remember, it's that in that specific period, our unemployment rate in Singapore soared. And this was after the Asian financial crisis. Some of us had parents at the time who lost their jobs. And if you recall, at the time, newspaper articles were very obsessed about this one word, and it was called recovery. Everybody was waiting for specific industries that were not doing well during the Asian financial crisis to recover so that people could go back and apply for jobs again. So this diagram here is from like one of those MOM things, and it essentially shows that in 2009, about 50,000 people lost their jobs. And for a small country like Singapore, 50,000 is no joke. However, you see, what we're expecting in 2020 and 2021 is going to be even less of a joke than 08 and 09. Now, the reason is very simple, because this time around, we are not waiting for a recovery. As I showed you in the very first section of my presentation, is that some of these industries are disappearing and they are never coming back. So once that plane gets off the ground, guys, it's not landing anymore. So the thing is, some industries are going to disappear forever. We are not going to see anymore, which means that if it's not as simple as waiting for an industry to recover and then you go back to JobsDB and apply for a job. That's not going to happen anymore, guys. So and that's one of the reasons why it's even more important for each person to start rethinking what you're going to do in your career and in your business. Okay, and so for that reason, we need some new plans, and it basically means that for many of us, it's reconsidering that a new plan is not as simple as switching into a new industry. It's not as simple as going to a WDA training to get yourself into something else, or it's not as simple as making yourself cheaper, faster, better. None of that works anymore. We are talking about a completely different mindset that people need to have in order to sort of transit into this new world. And so what I shared in this event was that I had delivered on my promise. I told you that I would describe what would happen in the world. I told you I would give you specifics on which industries were going to be involved. I also told you that I saw turbulence in Singapore's events for 2020, and I shared them with a lot of detail. And I hope you realize that I've put my personal reputation as an astrologer on the line, not just on stage, but even in the video that you now hold in your hands. I've put my own personal reputation on the line just to put this message out there. And the thing is, I'm very clear that until we get specific, right now I've tried to be as specific as I can, and even then the problem is that I could stop right here, and all I've done is just give people a lot of information. So the good news is, okay, great, now you know. But you see, knowing is not the same as being prepared. And I want people to realize that if I'm offering a program, it's not necessarily about trying to make some money off people, but rather that we have a tool that's going to help people to make this transition. And it's in all sincerity that this is what we're offering. And so the reason why I'm doing it as a one-day program is because there's no time. And it really has to be done in February, because most of you are dealing with something that's totally new and you've not actually dealt with it before. And what this means is that you probably need about 6 to 7 months just to have things settled. And what's important here is that this is not a new program. I started running this last year for the simple reason that I had known for years I have known for years that this is going to happen in Singapore. And I started running it last year, my programs, career transition programs, because I needed to know that by 2020 that I have something that definitely works. And we've gotten phenomenal results with engineers who have switched into cat sitting businesses. We've had phenomenal results with pharmaceutical salespeople who have successfully switched into Reiki businesses. We've got management trainees who now do holistic education for kids who are at risk. And this is not just about getting them to pass exams, but to get them to improve relationships with their parents and so on and so forth. But what I'm trying to show you here is that we've helped a lot of these industry professionals make a complete switch into businesses that take care of the number one, the natural audience, number two, their fundamental skills, and number three, the kind of communities that they really should be in. And so, and you realize that it takes a completely different mindset shift. This is not about asking about an ROI or like whether it's faster or cheaper. These people have gone and dug deep into themselves to say, what is it that I can offer to the world? Take away the education, take away their job positions, what else is left? And so prior to this event, now I shared this during the event, that I thought about how I could help more people. And the logical thing would be to offer everybody personal and private consultations. But I realized that this is not going to work for the simple reason that there's just too many of them. And not just the people who are in the auditorium, but it's a lot of Singaporeans. There are too many traits. There are so many of you in different kinds of circumstances. And the truth is, there isn't enough time. The truth is, even if I wanted to offer myself up for private consultations, and even if I didn't even if I didn't sleep or eat for the rest of the year, there's no way I could help as many people as I wanted. And so one of the things is, I also asked the audience if it was okay if I explained specifically to each person, how is it that you're going to transition from your old career to your new? And also what you're going to offer the new audience, and even, do you even know who this new audience is? And ultimately, how are you going to make a living using new methods? Because we're not talking about salary here, and we're not even talking about any kind of benefits that a company can give you. And you may not get the kind of month by month kind of stability that you have been very used to. And so this goes way beyond fortune telling. It goes way beyond just personality profiling. I'm trying to use this like career profiling with astrology in as practical a way as possible. And so, and as I put this out, it's not everybody that needs this. I have friends who run F&B businesses, and frankly, you're going to be safe, but people still need to eat. But who are the people who really needs this is that if your traits is in any of these, if you know that you're in earth trait and that your company isn't going to make it, and even if it does, it's not going to make it past 4 years, 6 years. So what if it makes it past 2020 and 2021? How about beyond that, right? And if you're going to make a transition, I'd rather you do it right now. It's also for you if you have a family to feed. And as Singapore starts to become a little bit, well, less stable than what we're used to, it's not okay to not have a plan, because your family is going to be affected. It's not just you. It's also for you, and quite a lot of my participants are of a certain age, and it's not like you can just go and apply for a job, right? And if you have to move everything online, there are some of you who are just not that good with an online space. This is also for you if you think this is a great opportunity. The truth is, I've been an astrologer for a very long time. And one of the things I get consulted on most of all is career consultations. I'm frankly quite overwhelmed by how unhappy Singaporeans have been in your current jobs. So yes, it may look stable, but it's not like people are happy anyway. Most of you are stressed up. Most of you are tired with your work. It's one of the reasons why the words passive income is so popular among Singaporeans, because I don't think it's because you want to be a multi-millionaire. I think it's because you're just hoping not to work anymore. You're just hoping to just be with your family, be with your friends, and somehow get something to live your life by. And what this tells me irrevocably is that Singaporeans really don't like their work anymore. And in fact, to that extent, I'm actually really happy that this change is happening in Singapore, because it means that people get to do what they love, work with people that they like, and actually make some kind of decent income. It may not mean that you're a multi-millionaire, but I think that idea is going to go out of style in the new world. And so even for my construction engineer who became a cat sitter, she's been going around telling people about the quality of life that she's had. Even though on the surface it looks like a massive pay cut, but the thing to her, it's like, I would rather do this than go back into the construction industry. Okay, so this is for you if you are one of those Singaporeans and you think that this is a great opportunity anyway to transition from a career that you didn't like to something that you could serve the world, Singapore or the world, on your terms. And this is also for you if you recognize what I'm saying and you recognize the gravity of my message and that we have no time, and that it is the people who want to be well prepared, and so that you have enough time to plan for a career before things start happening, okay? And so that we don't rush, okay? So what this is about, okay, now first of all, it's a practical option. Some people have asked me what this event is going to be. We're going to work with individual charts. There will be specific keywords that I want people to work with in my one-day event so that we can build a plan, right? So this is the three key concepts that we're going to be covering are the natural audience, people who will naturally want to work with you. Also, your fundamental skills. Some people are just great bakers. Some people can't bake for nuts, right? You see what I'm trying to get at. So we want to get at what your fundamental skill is. And the third one would be the kind of communities that you work with, because there will be no companies anymore. And you want to think about who are the people that you really should be working with, not just your customers, but other kind of skills that you kind of need to have some kind of synergy with, okay? So these are the three main points. And as during the event, the practical options also mean that I'm covering the principles of what it means to go from earth to air, and we'll start applying them into the various industries so that people are aware what kind of risks they're up against, and also what they could do about it, okay? And so as you can expect, I'm not going to do this with 100 people in the audience, right? We're going to need something a bit smaller, which is the reason why I'm limiting it to 40 people in each class. And that's the reason why, given the kind of overwhelming response that we had on Saturday, we just have about 7 seats left on 15th of February and a few more on the 22nd of February. Please let my team know, okay? And so we use astrology chart, your astrology chart, to find a solution that's right for you. It will be practical, it will be based on your age, your experience, your skill level, and the current resources that you realistically have. Not all of us are multi-millionaires. Not all of us are able to set up like complex resources. So we do things that freelancers can do within a reasonable 6 to 7 month period of time, okay? And these are tools that definitely we want you to be able to immediately apply it, okay? So this is my program, How to Thrive in Turbulent Times. And I mean it, right? And you notice I didn't say survive. I actually said here thrive. Because to me, the point of surviving means that we are all focused on the fact that, oh my God, we're going to die. And to me, that's not how I would like to use astrology, right? If we are going to do this, guys, let's just make this work, right? And you can say I'm trying to start some kind of a movement in Singapore where people are looking forward to this new world, rather than be really upset that we're going to be losing all the things that Singapore is known for. Let's just accept that there's going to be a mindset change, and let's just thrive in this new thing, okay? So as I said, it's 15th and 22nd of February. If you decide to do this, you have to choose one of the dates. They are both Saturdays, okay? We're going to do this from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. I'm going to sit there with group sizes of not more than 40 people, okay? I'm doing this at Suntec City Convention Center. And if this is something that you like to do, whether it's you yourself or perhaps you have friends, family members, colleagues whom you think is going to benefit from this, we'd like to ask you to take a step further and please share this with them, okay? What you do is you email us at hello@selfastrology.com. Now the course fee is going to be $794. And most of you who are receiving this video would have known that the people who signed up on Saturday had a massive discount. And I would like you to know that this price, $794, is still a massive discount off my usual program. I mentioned that some people had done the program with me last year. I'd like you to know that what they paid was about 2 to 3 times this price. Okay, so I'm so sincere about getting people to do this program that I'm doing it at an insane fee. Okay, so the fee is $794. I'm going to let this be open until Thursday, which is this Thursday, 23rd of January, and I'm closing registrations at 2359, just so that my team has enough time to prepare. Okay, so please send this out to people, and just let my team know if you need any more information, okay? So I've come to the end of my summary. I know it's a bit of a long video, and I've made this because I know many of you want to share this with your friends and your family. And I hope that I've made your life a bit easier. As I said, I'm much more phenomenal on stage. Most of you have actually seen me in action on stage. I'm trying my best. I'm working with my team to try and see if we can do much more of these live events. my schedule is really packed for 2020, and there are companies who do want to work with me right now because of what's happening. Okay, so but let's try our best to do as much of these live events. And if you do have friends, family, contacts, your colleagues who do want to see me live in action, we'd like to thank you in advance if you're sharing this with them. Okay, so and yep, peace out.